Reality is plain as day, especially in places like Washington State, where we are on the front line of a trade war with our neighbors that nobody asked for.
Imagine walking into your local supermarket and finding the shelves empty of your favorite tomatoes, or the price suddenly doubling overnight. Sounds extreme. But that's exactly what could happen as Mexico, facing new U.S. tariffs, pivots billions in exports toward Canada instead. Not long ago, fresh tomatoes from Mexico were a staple in countless American kitchens, brightening up salads, sandwiches, and family dinners everywhere. But after the U.S. slapped a 17% tariff on Mexican tomatoes, something changed almost overnight. Mexico started turning its trucks and trains north, funneling nearly $2.8 billion in produce, mostly tomatoes, into Canadian supermarkets instead. Now, for American shoppers in their 40s and 50s, that reliable basket of tomatoes is a little lighter and the price tags sting. Experts say the cost of tomatoes could jump by 40 to 60 cents a pound within just a few months. It may sound small, but across the country, that's an extra $120 million Americans might spend at the grocery store this year, just for one fruit. Suddenly, keeping a favorite salsa or summer salad on the table feels a bit more like a luxury. Families are left to wonder, what will they have to give up next when the price of something so basic keeps climbing? It's a small shift with big meaning, echoing through kitchens and lunchboxes, and quietly reshaping family routines in ways no one expected. There was a time when a carton of fresh tomatoes barely made a dent in the budget. But since the return of a 17% anti-dumping tariff, part of a political back and forth that's been going on since 2019, things are looking different at checkout. For many, especially those entering retirement or juggling middle-aged expenses, the sticker shock is real. The impact goes beyond tomatoes. When trust in supply chains breaks down, it's not just the produce aisle that feels the squeeze. Everything from wine to electronics can get pricier. Analysts now warn that if the current trade climate holds, the average American household will spend about $210 more on food over just 6 months. For the local grocer down the street, that means hard choices. Absorb the hit, or raise prices and hope loyal customers stick around. It's a reminder that tariffs don't just change ledgers, they change daily routines. And for many, the comfort of a well-stocked pantry. The ripple from just one policy can unsettle everyday habits, making each trip to the market a little more uncertain than before. In the background of these shifting trade winds, a bigger question is brewing. What happens when America is no longer the center of the region's dinner table? As Mexico deepens its partnership with Canada, and other countries, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, watch and rethink their own alliances. The old trade routes begin to blur. The effect can be felt in lunchboxes and kitchen drawers. Within a year, as many as 15,000 jobs could disappear from the American export sector, many of them in industries where cross-border trade once seemed a given. For middle-aged workers and their families, it means fewer chances, tighter budgets, and hard conversations about the future. It's not just about paying more for tomatoes or everyday goods. It's about a new uncertainty in what it means to buy American, and who really pays the price when the world shifts its gaze elsewhere. It's a moment that could redefine how Americans fill their shopping carts and plan for tomorrow's meals, even as the world around them keeps changing.
We need to be ready to escalate using every tool in our toolkit. That includes surcharges or even outright restrictions on the critical minerals and electricity we supply to the United States.
Just as the U.S. heads into peak summer heat, New York's power grid is nearing overload, and monthly electric bills are quietly creeping up by tens of dollars. Meanwhile, across the border, Canada isn't raising its voice or launching direct attacks. Instead, it simply adds a quiet surcharge on exported electricity, and suddenly entire U.S. industries start to wobble like dominoes. So what's really happening behind the closed doors of those power stations? And why is this electric power standoff between Trump and Carney shaping up to shift the entire energy balance across North America? Starting March 10, 2025, Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge, around $7 per megawatt, on electricity exports to U.S. border states like Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. Though the U.S. imported about 15 terawatt-hours from Canada in 2023, worth nearly $3.2 billion, that's a big drop from 42 terawatt-hours the year before. This quiet but sharp move signals Canada is hitting where it hurts most: power prices. For families using about 800 kilowatt per month in New York, that could mean an extra $25 to $30 per month on power bills, starting as soon as Q4 2025. The surcharge doesn't just raise costs, it shakes grid reliability. NYISO and ISO New England estimate wholesale prices in New York could jump $15 to $25 per megawatt, roughly a 12 to 18% hike. In Boston, where a typical monthly power bill in summer is around $160, bills could rise to $180 or even $185. $190 in just a few weeks. Canada supplies roughly 11% of power to northeastern states. As supply tightens, U.S. utilities lean on pricier natural gas. By July 2025, gas hit $3.45 per MMBTU, up nearly 20% since January. Many U.S. substations are outdated, with 70% of the power grid over 25 years old. If power imports from Canada were lost for just 72 hours in winter, ISO New England warns up to 2.5 million households could face rolling blackouts, impacting heat, transit, and hospitals. Ontario expects to collect $150,000 to $200,000 per day from the new surcharge. That money is being reinvested in local grid upgrades and clean energy. At the same time, Canada is signing new electricity deals with the EU, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia, reducing reliance on U.S. buyers. Ontario is positioning itself as a clean energy hub, offering low-cost, long-term electricity to attract data centers, battery plants, and EV factories. Their pitch? Clean, stable power for 25 years. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers could be left with rising bills. If you live in Vermont, where over 50% of power comes from Canada, you could see your winter electricity bill rise by 15 to 20%, or about $45 to $90 more per month.
This bullying, we're a tenth of the size of that country, 300 million or 400 million people in the States and about 40 million in Canada. But we've picked no fight. But it just keeps. He's proven that he doesn't even respect our country anymore.
Canadians are boycotting American goods. You don't need to protest or go on TV to make a political statement sometimes. All it takes is simply not placing that next Amazon order. When millions of Canadians collectively say no to Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, or McDonald's, the U.S.-Canada supply chain starts to shake in ways no one quite expected. The quiet shift began in early 2025. About 85% of Canadians said they were actively replacing American-made goods with domestic alternatives, and 78% pledged to choose made-in-Canada products whenever possible. This wasn't just talk. Apps like MapleScan and OScanAda have been downloaded by hundreds of thousands of users, helping shoppers scan barcodes to avoid American products. The ripple effect is spreading. Grocery stores now feature Canadian-only tags, and coffee shops have started offering Canadiano instead of Americano. Big American brands like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, and Tesla are seeing sales drop sharply, some by as much as 60% to 70% in Canada. For many Canadian families, that means spending an extra $5 to $10 each week when choosing domestic snacks or household items over their cheaper U.S. equivalents. Every purchase is starting to feel a little more political and a little more expensive. This soft boycott isn't just affecting store shelves, it's reaching into tourism and logistics too. The number of Canadian travelers heading to the U.S. dropped more than 18% in the first half of 2025, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. In May alone, personal vehicle crossings at U.S.-Canada border checkpoints fell by 38.1%, the sharpest decline since 2020. That may sound like a traffic statistic, but it's hitting small towns hard. Tourism-heavy areas in states like New York, Vermont, And Washington lost tens of thousands of Canadian visitors, leading to roughly 14,000 jobs at risk in restaurants, hotels, and retail. Based on internal reports from the U.S. Travel Association, even Amazon has pulled back. In the second quarter of 2025, Amazon shut down 7 fulfillment centers in Quebec, cutting around 1,700 full-time jobs tied to North American distribution. This shift might not shake the entire U.S. economy overnight, but for people living near the border or working in freight and logistics, the income loss is real. A single canceled shipping route can mean $250 to $300 lost in wages per day for a truck driver. There are no loud protests or government bans here, just Canadians voting with their wallets. And some American companies are already feeling the pressure. McDonald's Canada saw a 60% sales decline in the first quarter of 2025, especially in provinces like British Columbia and Quebec. According to Restaurant Brands Canada, the company temporarily closed 18 underperforming locations to cut costs. Other well-known brands Heinz, Tesla, Jack Daniels, even Oreo are feeling the shift too, not because they've vanished from shelves, but because Canadian shoppers are increasingly choosing domestic alternatives. In a June 2025 survey by Field Agent Canada, 63% of consumers said they had already switched to Canadian food products, and 47% said they plan to keep doing so long-term. For U.S. factories that once supplied the Canadian market, this means fewer orders. A food packaging plant in Wisconsin, for example, that previously shipped bottle caps and labels to American brands in Canada, saw its orders drop by nearly 40% between April and June 2025. If the trend continues, some smaller operations may have to cut shifts or pause production for weeks later this year to balance out inventory. It's not a full-blown economic crisis yet, but it's clearly wearing down regional revenue and, more importantly, revealing a shift in long-term consumer behavior. Every time a Canadian family picks up a Maple Valley ketchup bottle instead of Heinz, or grabs a burger from the local diner instead of McDonald's, they're sending a quiet but powerful message about where their dollars go.
The United States have sent us a letter with measures that would come into effect unless there is a negotiated solution. So we will therefore also extend the suspension of our countermeasures till early August.
Something big just happened, and almost no one is prepared for the fallout. America's aggressive new tariffs have set off a trade war with the EU and Canada, triggering billion-dollar reprisals and forcing the world's supply chains into uncharted territory. Imagine you're an experienced engineer at Boeing's Seattle plant. One evening, you hear the administration is imposing 30 to 50% tariffs on goods from the EU, Mexico, and Canada. Within hours, the EU cancels a $43 billion Boeing order. Canada and the EU retaliate with $95 billion in counter tariffs and quickly shift major deals to Airbus and other suppliers. Suddenly, familiar business partners back away. Next morning, the factory feels different. Workers quietly discuss possible layoffs, pay cuts, and worry about the next bonus or summer plans. It's not just Boeing suppliers. Cafeteria owners and small machine shops near the plant also get nervous as big clients look elsewhere. If cancellations and the move to Airbus continue, 15,000 to 18,000 jobs could disappear from aerospace hubs in Washington and Texas in the first year. With average monthly earnings at $5,500 per worker, these communities could lose $80 to $100 million in income monthly. Families with someone in aerospace may see their household budgets drop by $700 to $1,200 per month, forcing tough choices about groceries, mortgage, car payments, or tuition. In boardrooms at Ryanair, switching from Boeing to China's Comac jets is no longer out of the question. For the first time, European airlines are openly considering Chinese planes instead of American-made aircraft. This threatens the decades-old leadership of the FAA and the reputation of American aviation safety worldwide. Families in America's plain towns, proud to have relatives at Boeing, now worry about job security and long-term benefits. Skilled workers are left considering career changes if European airlines truly go Chinese. Outside the plants, local diners and gas stations notice fewer regulars as business slows. Should Ryanair and others make the switch to Comac, Boeing could lose at least 5,000 to 7,000 direct and indirect jobs in the U.S. over 2 years. The lost contract value could reach $8 to $10 billion, forcing thousands of families to cut back on savings, delay home purchases, or put off college plans for their children while U.S. firms wait. Canada and the EU quickly use CETA for zero-tariff trade. Clean energy, rare earths, EV batteries all flow freely, bypassing the U.S. Many American suppliers are left out. U.S. contractors and engineers see deals shift to Canadian rivals. Projects are postponed. Salaries cut. Jobs lost. Opportunities in EVs and AI now head north. If this continues, U.S. sectors could lose 6,000 to 8,000 jobs in a year. Export contracts may drop $1,500 to $3,000 per month per company. Lost contracts could total $60 million per month across the sector. Across America, people talk about new EU trade deals with India, the Middle East, and Africa without U.S. involvement. Digital and green standards set the tone. Networks like EU-Canada and China-India are rising, with the U.S. left out. Anxiety rises for families tied to multinational firms, export jobs, or the dollar. Investments and savings now feel less secure as America's central role fades. If this shift continues, U.S. capital inflows could fall $150 to $200 billion per year. Families may see $300 to $500 per month less in investment returns and bonuses, forcing new budget decisions as America risks being left behind.
The new spending law changes how Americans pay for education at every level. One provision affects school vouchers with a possible ripple effect on public school funding. Another targets large university endowments, bringing a new tax reality to higher education.
You might get a few $100s back for giving to charity, but you could also lose thousands if your child is aiming for a top university. Trump's new tax law is changing how we fund both education and our communities. The real question is, who stands to benefit and who could be left behind? Starting in 2027, the One Big Beautiful Bill introduces a dollar-for-dollar tax credit up to $1,700 a year for donations to K-12 private school scholarship programs. This replaces the old system of regular deductions. With no federal cap on the total credits available, some experts estimate the government could end up covering as much as $100 billion annually. For families with no children in private school, this means public school funding may take a hit, especially in programs supporting students with disabilities. For example, if a student needs an aide at $20 per hour, budget cuts might reduce that support, directly affecting the classroom learning experience. Also in 2020, universities with large endowments will face higher taxes under the new law. Schools holding more than $750,000 per student in endowment funds will pay a 4% tax. Those with over $2 million per student will pay 8%, a sharp increase from the current 1.4%. However, colleges with fewer than 3,000 tuition-paying students, like Amherst or Wellesley, are exempt no matter how large their endowment. For top universities like Harvard, with an endowment over $50 billion, the new law could cost $200 to $280 million a year, enough to fund hundreds of scholarships or entire research programs. Even schools like Rice University expect to pay more than $10 million annually, roughly the value of 100 full scholarships. To adapt, many universities have started freezing hiring, delaying raises, and slowing student enrollment growth. Families sending students to top-tier schools may notice tighter financial aid, fewer scholarships, and less generous tuition offsets. If you're planning for an Ivy League education, you might need to budget several $1,000s more per year than previous classes did. Beginning in 2026, the law also introduces a charitable deduction for non-itemizers up to $1,000 for individuals and $2,000 for couples. For the first time, over 90% of Americans who use the standard tax form will be eligible for this kind of deduction. That means if you normally give $500 to charity but don't itemize your taxes, you can still reduce your taxable income by $500 and possibly get $50 to $100 back at tax time. It's a practical way to reward everyday generosity. But wealthier donors and businesses face tighter limits. High-income individuals can only deduct up to 35% of their adjusted gross income AGI and must subtract 0.5% AGI from their donation total. For businesses, the reduction is 1% of AGI. Experts estimate this could reduce large-scale charitable giving by about $81 billion over the next decade. If you've noticed major donations from big companies or wealthy individuals to museums, arts programs, or research institutions, those contributions may become less frequent. This could leave some of those organizations needing to pause or revise plans if they cannot find replacement funding.
How can we find a way to support each other? And then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets.
Did you know that the Ford you're driving or the dishwasher you're planning to buy next month might no longer be made in the US? It didn't take a major blow from a foreign competitor. America is weakening its own manufacturing base as more and more major companies quietly move operations north, choosing Canada as their new home. In just the past 18 months, more than $7.2 billion in investment from major players like GM, Ford, Tesla, and Alcoa has quietly flowed into Canada. It's not about cheaper labor, it's about lower total costs. In Canada, industrial electricity runs around 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour, about 45% cheaper than in US manufacturing states like Ohio or Michigan. Add to that, the faster approvals getting a factory built in Canada takes months, not years like it often does in the US, especially for industries like clean energy or battery production. One example, Honda is planning a 15 billion Canadian dollars, about 11 billion US dollars, electric vehicle and battery complex in Ontario, backed by major funding from both the Canadian federal and provincial governments. Earlier, Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, secured over 1 billion Canadian dollars for its battery plant in Windsor. So what does that mean for everyday Americans? It's simple. Jobs that might have landed in Michigan or Georgia are now heading to Canada. Each complex like Honda's can mean 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, gone from the US, not just factory jobs, but construction work, parts suppliers, and shipping and logistics roles. If you live in a town that's long relied on industry like Toledo, OH or Flint, MI losing a plant might mean fewer diners staying open, daycares shutting down early, or even local home prices falling because no one's moving in anymore. The US decision to raise steel tariffs to 50% has already triggered a real spike in material costs. Right after President Trump's announcement, hot rolled coil HRC, a core material for many industries, jumped about 6%, or $240 per ton. Aluminum, used in everything from food packaging to cars and electronics, shot past $1,279 per ton, up over 20% since January. For automakers, that's painful. A pickup truck like the Ford F-150 or Chevy Silverado now costs nearly $5,700 more in materials alone without any extra bells or whistles. If you were planning to buy a truck for around $45,000, that price could easily cross $50,000. And it's not because the vehicle got better, it's just the taxes. And it's not just about price tags, it's about jobs. In places like Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia, factories are getting fewer orders because they can't compete with Canada's lower costs. Some Georgia plants have gone from 3 shifts to just 1. And reports show over 3,500 workers have either been furloughed or laid off in just the last 6 months. For the rest of us, it shows up in rising prices on anything that uses metal, from soda cans to fridges to washing machines. That $799 dishwasher you were eyeing, next month, it might cost $850 to $875, simply because of tariffs and more expensive raw materials. While the US wrestles with rising tariffs and shifting investment, Canada is stepping up fast, becoming North America's new high-tech hub. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec are now being called Battery Valley, with massive projects in EV batteries, clean energy, and electronic components taking root. Swedish firm Northvolt is investing $5.2 billion in a mega battery plant in Quebec, expected to create 3,000 to 6,000 skilled jobs. According to Economic Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon, they're tapping into Canada's low-cost hydroelectric grid and government incentives that include extended tax breaks and easier approval processes for key materials like nickel and lithium. Both crucial for battery manufacturing, Canada's strategy is about more than foreign money. They're building a fully domestic supply chain, from mining and refining to assembly and recycling. That gives them protection from fragile global supply lines and an edge when dealing with carbon regulations from the US and Europe. As companies shift north, skilled American workers, especially in tech, engineering, and battery systems face fewer opportunities. And the price of American-made goods may keep rising if we end up importing parts from Canada at higher costs. So if you're wondering why job listings in your town are drying up, or why your next microwave is $40 more than the last one, you might just need to look a few hundred miles north.
And with President Trump, what he said, he's offended him. I can understand tariffs. I don't really understand them, what's going to happen with all this, but it's got the world kind of going crazy right now.
Milk isn't just milk anymore, it's a luxury. Just days after the US imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, life in border towns like Point Roberts and Darby Line has changed overnight. Simple routines, from grabbing groceries to visiting neighbors, have become fraught with new challenges as tariffs ripple through every breakfast table. Border towns like Point Roberts, WI, and Darby Line, VT, once thrived on easy routines, families and retirees crossing for groceries, especially milk, as casually as attending church. But a new 35% federal tariff on Canadian goods has erased that way of life almost overnight. Local gas stations sit empty, diners miss Canadian regulars, and clinics are quieter as cross-border visits vanish. In Point Roberts, where 80% of business depends on Canadians, each day brings a tough question: how to survive when regulars are gone? Some shopkeepers now seriously wonder if joining Canada is their only hope. A joke turned real. Milk, once a simple staple, now stands as a symbol. Its price may soon jump $1.5 to $2 a gallon, turning a quick grocery run into a budgeting challenge. For these towns, trade policy now hits home right down to breakfast. There's a certain pride in working at Niagara Falls, New York, a place that once welcomed the world. For many middle-aged locals running restaurants or small hotels, tourism was more than a paycheck. It was a calling. Now, with Canadian flights down nearly 75%, empty dining rooms and silent hotel lobbies are common. Hotels, spas, and casinos have lost tens of millions. Some who managed front desks or kitchens now clean rooms, scraping by on less than the $1,200 average rent. For many couples, dinner talk isn't about dreams but how to pay next month's bills. As visitors vanish, so do jobs. By summer's end, over 800 full-time hospitality jobs could disappear, meaning fewer families can feel secure at home. When guests leave, a piece of the town's spirit goes with them. Insults to Mary, Michigan, border traffic is down 44%. For middle-aged families and retirees, the impact is clear. It shows up in higher prices at hardware stores. Lumber, once brought over regularly, is now rarer and pricier than ever. Local shops and restaurants have lost tens of millions. In Blaine, Washington, retail sales have dropped 30% in 3 weeks, wiping $25 million from the economy. As budgets tighten, schools and farmers markets cut back, and senior services fight to stay open, families start to wonder if it's time to leave. It's more than just lumber. When those prices rise, repairs, decks, and roofs all cost more, without change. The average household could pay $400 extra each month for groceries and supplies, a hit hard to handle for any family, especially those on fixed incomes. A question of trust and belonging. In places like Darby Line and Point Roberts, the border crisis is more than lost business. It's losing a sense of home. Neighbors who once celebrated together and shared meals are now separated, with border crossings from Canada down 23% from last year, leaving a deep ache. For many middle-aged locals, it's not just fewer customers or a quieter Main Street. It's about identity and belonging in a place that felt like ours. Distant federal decisions are eroding routines that once felt solid. If this continues, over 2,000 families may leave towns they helped build, giving up not just homes, but a whole way of life. The question remains, when community ties fray, what does it mean to be at home?
Reality is plain as day, especially in places like Washington State, where we are on the front line of a trade war with our neighbors that nobody asked for.
Imagine walking into your local supermarket and finding the shelves empty of your favorite tomatoes, or the price suddenly doubling overnight. Sounds extreme. But that's exactly what could happen as Mexico, facing new U.S. tariffs, pivots billions in exports toward Canada instead. Not long ago, fresh tomatoes from Mexico were a staple in countless American kitchens, brightening up salads, sandwiches, and family dinners everywhere. But after the U.S. slapped a 17%